Right, let's get started. So hello everyone and welcome to this week's webinar. The topic today is Simplified Risk Management, and we're gonna showcase you how you can simply do that by leveraging on our risk management platform. So my name is Jenna and I'm a Business Development Director at Impero, and I'm driving our sales activities in the Nordics and in the UK. And with me today, I have Morten Christensen, who is our platform expert, our head of customer success. And Morten, perhaps you want to quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, I can do that. Thank you, Shanna. My name is Morten Christensen. I have been a part of Impero for 5.5 years or something like that. I am, as Shanna mentioned, heading our customer success department, so I know every little detail there is to know about our solution, and I'll be showcasing the Impero side of the risk management for today.
Brilliant, thank you, Morten. And as for myself, as I was mentioning, I'm a business development director at Impero. I bring a decade of experience from the professional services industry, where my focus has always been heavily weighted towards the risk management, the internal control space. I have functioned both as a finance accountant, as a risk management consultant advisor, and as an internal and external auditor. So I understand risk management, and I have first-hand experience with risk management in quite a number of capacities. I think what became quite apparent for me over the last 3 to 4 years is that this is a space where it's driving very much attention from companies nowadays. So we both want to get assurance that all relevant risks are identified and they are appropriately addressed. And likewise, executive directors have to do the same. They need to make sure that they report to their board of directors on the risks and that these have been addressed. And then there are basically the rest of the company who is working with risks on a day-to-day basis, being responsible for identifying these and addressing these. So I can imagine that every one of you today is part of your company's risk management mechanism in one way or the other. So if we take you through the agenda today before we get started, we will do a deep dive into our risk management module, where we are gonna showcase for you how you can easily make sure that you have a common reference, a common understanding of risks across your company. And when I say risk across the company, it can either be from an organizational level, where we talk enterprise risk, or it can even be from a process perspective, that we make sure that we have a common understanding of what risks are we exposed to within a given process. And basically showing you how you can easily identify at least manage the identified risks within the risk management platform, how you can evaluate them, and how you can tag them to mitigating actions, so how you can effectively address these risks. We are also going to talk a bit about access rights, user administration, management of access rights, in the sense that we know that some risks are not relevant to everyone, should not be seen by everyone. And talking about these access rights, we're also talking a bit about these different types of risks you can identify. So whether it's a risk that's applicable to the entire company, or whether it's only applicable to, say, a number of entities. So yeah, really diving deep into the risk management module today. You have the opportunity of asking questions throughout this webinar, so please feel free to do that. We are gonna answer these as we go along, and we will also hold some space at the end to answer any questions. So Morten, over the next 30-35 minutes, you will be taking us through the risk management module. First of all, could you please basically show us how easily you can set up a risk directory once you've identified your risks within a certain process or at an organizational level? How can Impero support us?
Sure. So let me dive directly into Impero here. I'll just sign in here using my username and password. All right, so now I am in Impero, and I'll go directly to our risk management section here. So the risk management section in Impero is actually divided into a few different areas. So we have our risk directories. These are the three ones we have here. We have one within board level risks, one within compliant risks, one within that's just labeled Impero. This is the one that we'll be showcasing for today. And just one quick item before we dive into that is that you also mentioned it, Shannon. We do have the ability to actually support multiple entities as well. I'll be showcasing that in a second as well. But as to answer your question, then we dive into what we call the risk directory. Of course, if you are new in Impero, you can create a completely new one up in the upper right corner, but the view would essentially be the same. So a risk directory in Impero is where you essentially do all of your processes and all of your risks. So in this example here, we have 5 different processes: finance, CIT, TP, VAT, and IT. But this is completely flexible to whatever processes you actually have in scope within your company. So in order to actually create a new one, you simply hit add here, and you click new process if it's a process you want to create, or new risk, of course, if it's a new risk. So if we use the finance process here as an example, then we can unfold this and see, well, within this specific process here, we actually have 3 different risks. And let's just use this CM2, our bank balance here, as an example. And this is just, now there was actually a bullet also around customized risk management in Impero, and we'll get a bit back to that. But this is how our out-of-the-box solution looks like. So a risk in Impero, it consists of a name, a description, and then a scope. We'll just stick to global for now. And then it's built upon the COSO framework, so it's set up with these financial statement assertions and objectives. So this is where you can essentially, from a central point of view, design all of your different processes. You can create all the risks that you are exposed to. And then up here at the top on the entity tab, we will actually see, and this was also the entity tab that I mentioned here at the beginning, but this is where we actually link the risk and say, all right, we have this risk we have identified. Where does this risk actually apply? So in this case here, it's assigned to Impero AS. It's assigned to Impero Africa, DK, and in Germany as well. So what's important here is that we can actually distinguish between each of these, and each of these entities here, they have their own set of access rights. And before we jump into how to actually assess this risk here, I'll actually just take it one step back here and then say, well, if we have a look at this entity overview, what options do we actually have? And if we use Impero AS here as an example, then we can see, well, these are the users that has access. And as you can see here, then I have access. I have an admin access. Having an admin access means that I can actually grant other users in Impero access to this specific entity here. So I could grant Shannon access, for instance, and then I can decide, well, should Shannon be an admin like me? Should she be able to only have an edit access, meaning that she can essentially edit every single detail, but she can't actually grant others access as I can? Or is it solely for like reporting purposes and to get an overview? Well, then you can provide her with a view access, which means, well, you can see how all of the risks are assessed for each of these different entities. But you can't actually go and change how the assessments actually went. Perfect. So let's dive into where I'm actually changing position a little bit, whereas from the risk directory level where we were just at before, this is where we, as I mentioned, design all of the different processes, create all of the risks, and we assign them to the different entities. Now we imagine that I am actually sitting as a local user of a given entity. Then this is actually what I will be able to see. And if we use the same process as what we did before, then we can see that within our finance process here, we actually, or I'm actually able to see this risk here, but I'm able to see it 4 times. That's because we assigned it to 4 different entities, and I have access to all of these 4 entities here. It could be that I only had access to one. It could be that I only had access to Impero DK, for instance. Well, then all I will be able to see are all of the risks that are assigned to DK, and of course, without me actually having to go and apply a filter, this will all be pre-populated. So I only get access to the risks that I am actually responsible for. So if we dive into one of these risks here, then we can see all the data that we actually provided back on the risk directory that we were in before. I can edit any of this because it's actually being pushed out from a central point of view here. But what I can do is the actual risk assessment that I'll do here, and it's divided into 2 different sections. One being the inherent impact and likelihood, where from a scale here from 1 to 5, we'll be able to provide both an impact and a likelihood. Once again, and I'll come back to this later as well, if you use a different scale, if you use a 3x3 or 4x4 or something like that, then we also do support that framework as well. When I've done this, then I can actually go and decide, well, what do we actually do about this risk here? And this is based on a few different options here, where we can actually see, because we can mass assign these risks to multiple entities at once, then we have a not applicable option here. But it could also be that, well, we are actually transferring this risk. It might be something that was covered by an insurance or something like that. Could be that, well, we know that we have this, we're just trying to avoid it. Maybe we'll reduce it. I'll get a bit back to this, or maybe we'll simply just accept that we have this risk here. But as soon as I select reduce, which is actually the one that will trigger the rest of this flow here in Impero, I can actually start and linking this towards mitigating controls. As you can see here, we've already added 2 controls to this specific risk here, but it's actually possible to fairly easy apply other controls. Of course, the ones that are pre-created here in Impero. We'll just link this control here for now, and once that is done, I can do my reassessment up here and say, well, because we do these controls here, then, well, the impact might still be the same, but maybe we have reduced the likelihood for this risk to occur from likely to remote. And if we then look back here, then all what we will be able to do here is that right now I have access to all of these different entities here, so I can actually swap back and forth between our inherent view and our residual view. So it's very easy and it's very simple to get a very nice and very easy overview.
Brilliant. So now we've shown the risk directory. We've shown how once you've identified your risks, you can easily input them in there. You have your different parameters currently out of the box. It's basically designed leveraging on the COSO model. If it doesn't make sense to talk about financial statement assertions, you can get rid of that, and you can either include other parameters or you can simply just delete it, and likewise for objectives. So it's very customizable. And now you've also showcased that once you've identified your risks, You want to evaluate them, you want to prioritize them. We want to make sure that we're basically using our capital, using our resources in an effective manner, which risk management is all about. So we have a nice illustrative heat map where once we've identified, once we've evaluated our inherent risk levels, we can then determine how we should prioritize them for treatment. And that is basically how we plug them into our mitigating actions and linking them to our control module. So that's a very simple way to basically have a common understanding, have a common overview of your risks.
Exactly. So let's jump just one minor step back again and then say, well, now we have talked about global risks, but let's imagine that I am actually a user. Maybe I am sitting in Impero AS and I only have access to this one entity, and I need to create a risk that only applies for my own entity. What I'll then have to do is that I'll jump to the risk directory here, just as we did before. I'll say, well, maybe it's a finance risk that we are doing. I'll just create it here within the finance process. I can label it, and I'll just label it a local risk here for now. And then what we'll actually do is that I'll change the scope here from being global to being local. If I only had access to one entity, then I'll not be able to actually do a global risk. This is only because I have access to the entire risk directory. But this actually means that now I can create a local risk that only applies for this one entity here. So we can essentially support both that you have like a top-down approach where you say, well, we have these risks and these applies for everyone. And then, of course, this might only be like a 95% fit, but then in each of the individual entities, they can say, well, these risks here are not applicable, but when they're reassessing it in maybe a year or so, well, then we can actually go and reevaluate that specific risk. But in order to get the full picture, then it might be a need that you could actually apply your local risks as well, because this might be a very unique risk that only applies for either my country or for this specific entity that we have. Then I can create it like so. And as soon as I do this, then we do this little location marker here, so we can actually fairly easy again get an overview of, well, which risks do we actually have that are global risks, and which do we actually have that's a global risk. So and up here we can also say, well, I want to have a look at each of the local risks that we have in scope. So that's also fairly easy to get a nice overview here. The assessment of a local risk is actually a bit of the same. Let's just, again here now we used this one here, so let's zoom in on this specific entity here. So again, it's a bit of the same as what we did before, but here we again showcasing that this is a local risk. Of course, in this case here, it's also visible from the title, but we also do it by showcasing this little location marker here, so I can actually see that, well, right within the finance process, I've been assigned to 4 risks. 3 of them are assigned globally, and the last one is one that only applies for my entity. But the risk assessment itself here, it's just the same. So I'll not do it here, but it's essentially just the same as what we just did before, where you go and apply your inherent impact likelihood, assign your mitigating measures, and then your reevaluation of the risk. So we support both a top-down, a bottom-up, and a mixed approach to this, depending on how your company is structured.
Brilliant. We were talking a bit about how it's a very flexible system, how we can customize it the way that we would like in order for it to make it a fit for our company. Perhaps you can show us a couple of examples as to how you can customize it.
Yes, of course, and there are actually two places where we can, and I'll just show those both of these here from this view here. So essentially, of course, there are a few parameters that we need in order for Impero to function. So we need to have a title, we need to have a description, and there need to be a scope. So these three items here mandatory, so we need to have these. But as you mentioned, Sanne, then well, financial statement assertions and objectives. Well, if it's not within your scope, then we can remove it or we can replace it by something else. But we also do have clients that say, well, having an impact and likelihood scale is fine, but it's a bit more detailed, so we don't have an impact per se. Maybe the impact is actually calculated by doing 3 or 4 other different evaluations, and then we actually do that. It might also be that you work with a risk score. But let me show you here because we just did a few examples here. So here, as you can see, it's the exact same engine that we are actually using. But we actually do have a calculated field here. In this case here, it's a suggested impact. So what you actually do is that you go and say, well, we don't evaluate only an impact and the likelihood. We actually evaluate that, well, we have a reputational risk and we have a financial risk. And based on these two drop downs, we calculate, well, what should the impact then be? Then it might be that, well, you evaluate this a bit different afterwards, depending on what type of company you have. But this is what the framework actually looks like here. As mentioned, we also do have a risk score. In this case here, it's a number between 0 and 100. So we can actually use this in the table view that we have, and we can sort our risk based on this value here. We've also added in a process owner. This is basically just a drop down of options that we have. Now in this example here, we are just showing it for the inherent impact and likelihood, but of course we can do exactly the same for the residuals when you need to reevaluate the risks. So it's essentially based on the same options. We have another example here, which is a bit more of the same, but it might be a bit more sophisticated. So as of the one I just went through before here, we basically just do a suggested impact. So we will still go manually and evaluate this for our given entities. But in this example here, we actually calculate the inherent impact. So it's not something that I can manually go and do. And as you might be able to see, then we gray out the drop-down option. So it's actually not possible to do anything by hand here. And as you can see, this drawer here actually varies a lot from the standard that I just went through before, but the essence is actually still exactly the same. So we will have there's a region and a country element in it here, and then we do a strategic and operational, compliance, reputational, and financial impact. And these different options here, all is being calculated, and then we actually do an inherent impact based on these numbers here. In this case here, it's just a simple weighted average, but we can actually do quite a lot. So if you have some parameters that weights in a bit more than others, then we actually also do support that. The reason that we brought this here is that we know that there's a lot of different frameworks out there, and if we jump back to Impero here, then as you can see, this is our out-of-the-box solution. It's very easy to get started, quite fast, quite easy, and quite efficient. But we also have the ability, if you've done some work already that's located in Excel or in similar, and you have worked quite excessively with that framework already, then we can actually apply that directly to Impero and bring these risks a bit more back to life.
Brilliant. So we have a question now, Morten. We have one of our participants asking, how is it possible to get an overview where you can see that all of the risks that should be reduced are actually reduced by controls?
Yeah, excellent question. So actually what we have showcased here is a bit on how you actually assess the risk, but we actually didn't talk that much around this this table that we have here. But actually, all of the information is actually stored in this this table here, and using the adjust view here on my right side, I can add in or remove different objects that I wanna see. So for the sake of this question here, then what we want to have a look at is actually the controls column. Now it's already applied here, and I can actually see this is the one we have here. So essentially what I'll be able to see is that, well, our AP8 risk here has been, there's a AP8 control that's actually been assigned to this value here. But I can actually see that we also have a few blank ones, for instance, within our local risk here, and I can actually toggle. So instead of seeing this in this like a tree process view, I can toggle to a list view, and then I can actually sort on this very column here and see, well, these risks that we have here, they have not been assigned to any controls yet. So we have some within finance, some within corporate income tax, some within TP. And as well as I sort of proceed in my mitigation procedure here, well, then I'll be able to see, well, what's missing and what have I already done.
Brilliant. Thank you, Morten.
And I actually see another question here that's a bit related, and it's actually around, well, is it possible to actually do an export of all of these different items here? And it actually is. Of course, I'll just clear my filter here, but depending on what your filter is on and what you have access to here, then in our upper right corner here, we actually have an export feature. This will essentially export all of your different risks, what process it's within, both your inherent and residual values, essentially all of these different columns that we have here and that we can put in and out in our table view here. And this will make it a bit more maybe edible than just to have an overview here. Then, well, we know that, well, Excel can do a lot, so that's also why we have chosen to do an Excel export. So you can essentially export all of these values that you have. It will look very much like this table below here, and you get all of your data, and you will get just the basic details as well of the mitigating actions that we have.
Brilliant. We have another question here, which is about the periods of the risks, as what periods they apply to. So say this risk overview that we have here is relevant for 2020, and we now want to update it for 2021. Is it possible to distinguish between the periods for now, or how can we address that within Impero?
Yeah, so the way Impero currently functions is that, well, what we actually display here is the as-is view. So what we are looking at here is, well, which risks are we actually exposed to, and how are we mitigating them right now? We don't have like a save option currently in Impero, so it's not like we can, well, now we have done our risk assessment for 2020, and now we want to compare it to our 2021 risks. However, we do actually, now I mentioned the export before, that's actually how it's currently being handled by the majority of our clients. So, well, once we are done with our risk evaluation here, then we actually do an export. Another option is to actually well, create on a yearly basis, for instance, then we just do a copy of the risk directory, and then we'll have one for each year. That being said, it's and now the purpose for today is not to talk about what's to come, but it's something that's also in the early stages on our drawing board, to actually save these different snapshots, as we call them, so you can compare one view to another. So the short answer is that it's currently not possible to do within Impero, and we can sort of our workarounds is to do either an export where we do provide a timestamp on, or it is that we actually, like on a yearly basis, do a copy, and we remove the access rights from the old one, and then we apply them to the new one.
So basically, we don't have to start from a blank piece of paper when we have to update our risk assessment. We can simply copy the previous period, and then we can update whatever needs updated.
Yes, and I think this is very key, and this is also what we see help our customers quite a lot, is that, well, now I have a list. This is the list of the risks that I am responsible for. I need to make sure that these risks here are up to date. And now I would also assume that a lot of you are participating here. Well, we do know a lot about risks and controls, and how it's designed, and how they should be evaluated. But there are also some risk owners that might not have the same appreciation for this area here, and it's also means that it's actually we can at least make it a bit easier for them to guide them through that. Well, these are the risks that you're exposed to. You need to answer these handful of questions in our assessment, and then we do the calculation for impact likelihood for you. So we can do quite a lot of work to make it as easy as possible for the ones who needs to do these assessments here.
Brilliant. So that was a deep dive into our risk management module, how you can, in a very easy and simple way, get an overview of all of your risks, whether that being at an organizational level, at a functional level, or even at a process level. You can get this overview. You have a common framework as to how you're going to evaluate them, either using this out-of-the-box solution, which is a 5x5 scale, or it could be tailored into a 4x4 or 6x6, or being even more advanced into, as we saw before, where we're gonna do not only a simple evaluation, but do it across a number of risks, that being reputational, strategic, operational, or financial. So really we can tailor make it into how it makes sense to you, how mature your companies are, what your ambition levels are. And once we have an understanding of our risks, our inherent risk, we can basically have the people that knows about this risk the most, attaching our risks to these mitigating actions to make sure that we bring down the risks to what to you and your company would be an acceptable level. We have the opportunity to basically make sure that you are not being bombarded with information. You only get to see what's relevant for you, so that being you are only responsible for Impero AS, well, then you shouldn't be able to see the rest of the entities. Or, well, you are responsible for everything, for the entire risk management mechanism within your company. Well, obviously, you should be able to gain access to all of the risks. We have the opportunity to easily filter down our risks using our search bar. We can also export our risks to Excel to make sure that if you want to do some further editing, you can also do that. So I think that's it for today. If you have any further questions, if there was anything that wasn't quite clear, or if you're interested in getting a tailor-made demo for yourself, please feel free to reach out to Morten and I, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions or provide an extra demo. So here's our contact information, and thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Morten, for taking us through Impero.
Anytime. Have a great day.
Bye.